Hi, my name is Elliott, and I wanted to welcome you to my Interpersonal Communication Project presentation. This project originated from my Studies in Interpersonal Communication course at Liberty University. In this course, my colleagues and I developed an understanding of how to cultivate our interpersonal communication skills by enlarging the conversation. This process is actualized through an equation. As we learned in our course, enlarging the conversation begins first by identifying communication needs. This is then added to intentional resourcing. Additionally, we learned that we could take this equation and tailor it to our own communication styles. Although, when we apply it to ourselves, we change the semantics a little bit and call it enlarging my conversation, or EMC. After all, as Burley Allen mentioned, we need to be able to understand our communication process before we can adequately understand what others are trying to communicate to us. As I begin to share a little bit more about enlarging my conversation, I want to address the 5 components that will be included in this presentation: overarching goal, background, barriers, noise pollution, plan of action. As you have probably noticed, I constructed the concept map for this presentation in a circle. I did this intentionally to illustrate how EMC is a continuous cycle that will always be progressing or digressing depending on the variables within the equation mentioned previously. Let's jump to the core content of this presentation by taking a closer look at my overarching goal, which belongs to the identified needs category. Specifically, I wish to actualize my spiritual gifts. In order to understand the basis for this desire, I want to share a passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 8 with you. It states, "Now, to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom, to another a message of knowledge by the means of the same Spirit. Thus, in this manner, we are told that we all have been blessed with different valuable assets that we can use to work together through excellent interpersonal communication and create something greater than we could alone." Now that I have identified my overarching goal and connected its relevance to Scripture, I'm going to share a bit about my background and more specific sub-goals that fit into my overarching goal. Once again, this fits into the identifying needs portion of EMC equation. And it begins with my initial degree in communication studies. Specifically, throughout my degree, I focused intently on components of interpersonal communication and rhetoric. In fact, I even took several courses from Dr. Karen Zedeker, who was a major contributing author in our Bridges Not Walls course text. Second, I also learned about the unconditional love and grace of Jesus while I was in college. The combination of these influences motivated me to identify my spiritual gifts. These include being intuitive, inquisitive, and interested. First, let me discuss a little bit about the gift of intuitiveness. According to a study by Thompson et al., intuitive people can discern between logic and illogic while mitigating the influence of emotion. Next, I know how to ask questions in a manner that allows the talker to take ownership in their own solutions. Additionally, I believe that this exemplifies Scott's fierce conversations, because I often take the initiative to ask the hard questions and stretch the boundaries of creative problem solving, all with the power of supportive, not manipulative questions. I believe that I can ask these questions because my team knows that we are on the same team. Lastly, to use Stewart, Zedeker, and Widderborn's words, I love inhaling. What I mean by this is that I am truly interested in hearing and perceiving all the communicative messages being shared by others. People are absolutely fascinating, generally good, and love to share any kind of information with me, as long as I seem interested, ask open-ended questions, and engage in attentive silence. This background information is important to understanding my behavioral blend. Specifically, Stewart and Carbonell separately discussed behavioral blend as the positive and negative influences of environment on fruitful communication. In order to share factors that have played a role in my behavioral blend, I'm going to talk first about my relationship with my father. My father and I have a very strained relationship that originated from poor interpersonal communication. Specifically, Tannen said it best when she stated, "So the need for connection entailed control, and controlling each other is in itself a kind of connection." This concept is clearly reflected in how my father used language as an effective weapon. In this manner, I truly learned to always listen first as an offensive position, which is also exhibited in the self-assessments that I took in this course. The first assessment discussed is the Uniquely You assessment that I took in correlation with Carbonell's book. Even though Carbonell described my personality as a CS, I had a difficult time relating to it. I have learned that gentle guidance is an active form of communication with huge results. Additionally, I can see that my perspective is reflected in the second self-assessment. In this assessment, my results stated that I am 100% insightful and can interpret the words and opinions of others with ease. But there are some positives and negatives to my behavioral blend. First of all, there's a concept called the deflated stomachs. According to Peterson, this means that I am good at allowing people to let off enough steam to open their ears to other possibilities. On the other hand, under the negative section, I have a passive first impression. I tend to build relationships first and then try to move mountains. As we work the cycle of enlarging the conversation, I will talk about some of the barriers that were alluded to in the background portion of this presentation, falling under the needs category. My barriers include written communication, role play, and dialogic mindfulness. Now that the barriers have been introduced, I'm going to move further into the EMC equation by discussing intentional resourcing. First, let me talk a little bit about written communication. Since I prefer to listen first, I am most comfortable conversing face-to-face. Thus, Liberty's online graduate program has been challenging for me as I attempt to write my thoughts down without receiving immediate feedback as to how they were received. Second, I am sometimes misinterpreted in writing. My students often say that my course writing makes me seem very intimidating. As Thompson et al. Shared, I need to focus on using encouraging language such as providing thank yous and please in my instructions and feedback. I also really respected the words of Campbell, who stated the principle, quote, "I hear you and I have a different perspective," unquote. This creates a team atmosphere and a less intimidating situation. Next, I want to talk a little bit more about role play. Since I am fairly young and I'm working through really tough conflicts and situations as a career choice, I need all of the practice and grace that I can get. According to Rattling and Lisper, even a little bit of practice makes a huge interpersonal difference. Next, I felt the need to combine two concepts together and call it dialogic mindfulness. Scheffer's essay describes it as the ability to alleviate unnecessary outside distractions. As Zedeker and Stewart mentioned, communication can turn into dialogue when both parties are invested in understanding the other person. Since most of my current profession revolves around listening, I want to be more engaged so that everyone feels valued and feels that time was well used. As we move past the barriers, let's focus on the internal and external factors that cloud my ability to achieve actualization of my spiritual gifts. According to Burley and Allen, there are two kinds of pollutions that can disrupt effective communication: internal and external. Internal noise pollution consists of biased listening. When we listen in this manner, we only hear what we want to hear or expect to hear. On the other hand, there are external noise pollutions. This includes not being present in the moment by doing things such as multitasking. When I multitask, I tend to follow the ways of the world. Specifically, Duck and McMahon state that our actions are influenced by society. Thus, I plan to be intentional about these influence so that I can choose to engage in a way that honors God. In particular, Paul's message in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23 really spoke to this issue, that we must mold ourselves to serve as many people as possible. Thus, intentionality is key, and this is the perfect transition into the last stages of the cycle, which talks about action steps. There are two action steps that I plan to implement. First, I need to address assertiveness to my communication style, and I can do this without completely abandoning my soft approach by using the "I hear you and" technique discussed previously. Second, I need to make sure that I leak my faith and spiritual gifts onto others and teach about grace, forgiveness, and gentleness so that others may carry it into their leadership style. Once again, we revisit the enlarged conversation cycle and begin its process once more. Although not in this presentation. For you see, interpersonal communication is an ongoing process that illustrates the paradox of how gaining communicative knowledge reveals how much more work needs to be done.